Good day, everyone. For today's lesson, we're going to talk about the culture and moral behavior. So this would be the second chapter of our lesson. So we're done talking about ethics, moral standards, moral dilemma, and the non-moral standards also. I forgot to mention. Freedom as a foundation of morality. Next one is the minimum requirement for ethics or morality. We have reason and impartiality. So today we're going to talk about culture and moral behavior. So what comes first into your mind when you hear the word culture? And when you hear the word culture, ano yung unang pumapasok sa inyong mga isipan? Ano yung unang tumatatak sa inyo? Okay? To answer that question, kindly comment it sa ating Google Classroom mismo. So with that, with your answers, so let's proceed with defining what culture is. Culture is a way of life of group of people. Way of life in a sense that it talks about our moral values and behaviors. It talks about the moral values on that our parents or our ancestors have taught us. Then we also have the knowledge, beliefs, and symbols that they accept. That. So, yung mga turo sa atin, ano ba yung mga different knowledges or kaalaman, mga paniniwala from the very first generation up to another. What are the symbols na they accept? Yung mga symbols or ano ba yung mga bagay na sumisimbolo sa isang pangyayari o sa isang bagay. And as you can see in this wheel, ayan, we have the food and drink, the arts, tools and objects, techniques and skills, traditions and rituals, language, knowledge and stories, greater community values. So this parts or this culture wheel talks about what makes a culture is. So, yung iba kasi sa atin, when we hear or when they heard the word culture they always seem to hear or seem to visualize just arts and history, diba? But on reality, culture talks about these things. Yan, yung mga nasa ating culture wheel. So, lahat-lahat ng mga bagay that would make up a culture, eto yun. Diba? Kasama, like for example sa atin, kasama sa kultura natin mga Filipinos, yung how we prepare the food. Diba? The language that we are talking. Pag pumunta ka sa ibang bansa, pag sinabi na ay Filipino ka, marunong ka mag-Tagalog, 'di ba? Isa doon sa pagkakakilanlan natin yung knowledge natin. Our traditions and rituals, what are the traditions that we have? The rituals that we're always making, 'di ba? Like for example, one of our traditions is the Filipino Christmas. Sabi nila pinakamahaba daw yung Christmas ng mga Filipinos. And maraming feedback from the foreigners na pinakamasaya daw o isa sa mga pinakamasayang Pasko na naranasan nila or na-try nila is from the Philippines. Ayan. So, the different things, knowledge, and stories that could talk about that we have, like that. Next one, when we talk about culture, we have, and culture is passed along by communication or socialization from one generation to another. So, the way culture is passed along down from generation to one another is through communication or socialization. When we say socialization, it is the way on how we are socializing or the way we behave on a certain situation wherein it is socially acceptable for all of us. And it is also the means na on how we socialize and communicate with other people. Ayan po. And culture, always remember that it is learned. Okay? It is learned. It is not innate in us. So, we learn culture through communication and socialization. And the very first hand experience that we have is the morals and kung ano man or the teachings of our caregivers. Ayan. And then, napagyayaman na lang siya when we socialize to other people outside our family. And one of the agents also on how culture pass along from one generation to another is media. So as the teachers and the students throughout our school days, and yung mga immediate family members natin. And that's how we learn culture. Also by socializing with the people that we meet every day in the street. And culture, it is impossible to live in a society without being affected by its culture. Diba? So, as we all know, overseas Filipino workers, they're always part of our culture. I mean, sabi nga nila, ang mga Filipinos daw is kalat sa buong mundo, di ba? In every parts of the world, you will see or you will meet a Filipino. And according sa mga napapanood ko na documentaries about them, and they blend with the culture kung saan sila kung saan sila naninirahan o kung nasaan sila. Syempre, sabi nga dito sa aking lecture, it is impossible to live in a society without being affected by its culture. So, in every way, and in every part, no, once now we went into a place, from time to time, maaapektuhan pa rin tayo ng culture nun. So, for example, you are from the Mindanao. Ayan. Before, you don't know how to talk or to communicate in Tagalog. And then, afterwards, after a year or two, alam mo na, or straight ka na mag-Tagalog. Diba? And since Tagalog is not your mother tongue, yan, you learn the way, or you learn the culture in Manila. Diba? Which is, ayun nga, talking in Tagalog. And some other points. Before, here in the Philippines, diba? So here in the Philippines, hindi naman common nakakain tayo ng mga crickets or ng mga insects, diba? But though some culture or in some indigenous culture here in the Philippines, diba? They eat insects. But it's really not common sa Philippines. And after that, tumira ka sa Thailand. Which is sa Thailand, common sa kanila na kumakain sila ng mga crickets or ng mga grasshoppers or ng some insects, ganyan. And there are worms. Common sa kanila yon. And street food pa nga sa kanila yon. So, before, nung mga bago-bago ka pa lang sa Thailand, parang gross pa yun sa'yo. Hindi ka pa kumakain nun, di ba? And afterwards, after siguro a year or two, being there in Thailand, diba? Kumakain ka na nun. Kumakain ka na ng insect. In which, naging, na-adapt mo na yung culture ng society sa Thailand. Diba? So, that is an example that it is a society cannot live or cannot be functional without culture. So, with that, let's talk about another one. Learning culture is an essential part of human development. Yes. From the very beginning of our life or the first years of our lives, we learn culture na. From the way on how our parents or caregivers raise us, so as the way after na we can socialize with other people, we learn or we always learn culture. Doon pa lang sa parte na we socialize with other people, we learn the culture. So, di ba dito, the Philippine culture is so diverse. So, itself na hibala tayo to, hindi ganun ka-general yung mga bagay-bagay sa atin. So, in every region or in every um, province here in the Philippines, meron tayong kanya-kanyang paniniwala or beliefs and traditions. Diba? So, yun. And next one, after culture, we have social learning. So, through social learning, kanina ko sinasabi sa inyo na socialization, socialization, socialization. So, social learning, it is a process by which individuals acquire knowledge from other groups to which they belong as the normal part of their childhood. So, through social learning, we learn how to socialize. And through socialization, we learn culture. Yan. So, ang pinaka-cause why culture is learned is through social learning. It's because we're affected by one another. And the culture, through social learning, is passed down from one generation to another. And hindi natin totally or unconsciously we learn culture through social learning, syempre. So, socialization. No? Kanina pa ako socialization sa discussion ko. No? But, in this part, I will be discussing what socialization is. So, socialization is also known as enculturation. Remember this, ha? Another term for socialization is enculturation. So the process or socialization is the process in which we social learn culture including morality. Sabi ko nga sa inyo, the way or moral values that we have, that's how we learn culture or we learn culture through socialization. Yan. Kasama na doon yung moral values that we have. What is right and what is wrong in a certain culture. And it is the process of internalizing the norms and ideologies of the society. So, we process or we internalize kung ano ba yung traditions, kung ano ba yung food that we have, the beliefs, the morality, or the concept of right and wrong that they have in a certain society through socialization. And with that, we have cultural relativism. So how culture relates with each other. So through cultural relativism, it is our ability to understand a culture on our own terms, not to make judgment using the standards of one's own culture. Ayan. So, I think I have another one. Ayan. So dito, as you can see here in my example, ayan. Wait lang po ha, hindi, ayun, kami magsundo ng highlighter. So dito, try, have some crickets. They're delicious. I think I'll pass, thanks. In this part, diba? Let's have this conversation. Ayan. Kunwari, ikaw ito, si person number 1, and friend mo from the other country sa friend number 2. Since trying some or eating crickets is not on their culture, they find it gross. And at that point, you feel na offended and parang, ano ba naman to? Ang weird-weird naman ng taong to. Parang, ano ba? Ngayon ka lang ba nakakita or ngayon ka lang ba naka-encounter ng pagkain ng cricket? Class. always do remember, every nations in the world, every country in the world, so as in every part of the Philippines or province here in the Philippines, we have different beliefs. We have different traditions. We have different way of life. And in short, we have different culture. So um so the goal of cultural relativism is you, as part of a certain culture, you do not have, or you should not judge a culture based on your own culture. Na parang, ay, ang weird naman niya, ba't hindi siya kumakain ng ganito? Remember class, iba yung culture na kinalakihan or meron si person number 2 kesa sa'yo. Okay? So, yun yung goal ni cultural relativism. To not make judgment using your own standard of culture. Okay? So, let's try. Di ba? In a Philippine standard or a Filipino setting, budol fight, ito, ayan, is really, sorry, wait lang po. Ayan, budol fight is really, really common. So as yung pagkain ng nakakamay. Diba? And some foreigners really did not find this pagkakamay na common. Diba? And sometimes, there are reactions that they find it gross. Bakit ka nga naman kakain on your bare hands? Bakit ka nga naman kakain ng nakakamay kung mayroon namang utensils to use? Diba? Because budol fights or pagkain ng nakakamay, rather, is one of the parts of our culture. Diba? So, dito sa Pilipinas, okay lang na nang nakakamay ka. But, sa tingin nyo ba, pagdating sa ibang bansa, okay pa yun? Diba hindi na? Kasi they have their own culture din on how they eat the food that they have. So, another one. See here. Diba? So, Philippines, common na nakakamay. Sa ibang bansa, they use chopsticks or either they use the spoon and fork. Commonly, they use spoon and fork. So, that's how cultural relativism is. So, parang, nung nakita mo na yung ibang culture is nagkakamay sila, and yung ibang culture na nakikita mo na naka-chopstick sila, or they're using spoon and fork, or fork and knife, hindi ko lang pinailagay dito sa aking PowerPoint, or on the way how you accept those people na ganun yung ginagawa nila, or ganun yung behavior nila, when it comes to eating their food. And hindi mo sila ginudge at that very moment based on the culture that we have here in the Philippines. Diba? That is cultural relativism. And it is ability to understand the culture. Ay, ayan yung culture that they have eh. Okay, I will respect that. And in cultural relativism, the very goal of this is, I'll highlight this lang po. Promote understanding of cultural practices. Kasi, sabi ko nga sa inyo, in every parts of the world, they have the different culture. So as, pag pumunta ka sa ibang bansa, diba, there many times sinasabi na cultural shock. And then, parang, ay wait lang, hindi ganito sa amin sa Pilipinas eh. So, yung part na yun, parang, ay, wait lang, hindi ako sanay. But, through cultural relativism, ay, oo nga pala, iba nga pala yung kanilang paniniwala dito. Iba nga pala yung kultura na meron sila dito. Okay, I'll blend with kung ano yung ginagawa nila when they eat. Ganon. And, always do remember that, hindi tayo ganun or hindi tayo pare-parehas ng culture. So, ulitin ko, cultural relativism, ito yung abilidad natin para mas maintindihan o mas ma-accept natin yung culture ng ibang bansa or ng ibang lugar. At ang goal ng cultural relativism ay to promote yung understanding natin dun sa cultural practices ng isang lugar na hindi naman siya katulad ng sa atin. Okay? Next, moral relativism. So in moral relativism, it is the view that moral judgments are false or true only relative to some particular standpoint, and that no standpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. Ano kaya yun? Different moral principles apply to different persons or group of individuals. Okay. Kung kanina sa cultural relativism, I talk about how culture differs from one another. Okay? And cultural relativism is how are we going to accept one's culture na iba sa atin and the judgment that we have. Diba? And moral relativism, always do remember that moral judgments apply only to a particular standpoint. What standpoint? Particularly, it applies only to a certain culture. For example, sa Pilipinas, diba? The standard is concubinage or having so many partners or so many relationships, ayan, is not okay. It is a criminal act here in the Philippines. But in some certain cultures, okay lang sa kanila yon. As long as kaya nilang buhayin lahat ng family na meron sila. Diba? And one culture is different from one another. And also, always remember this, that it differs their moral principle. Meaning to say, iba yung moral principle na meron ka dito sa kultura na to hanggang dun pa sa kabila or dun sa isa pang kultura na meron sila. Or I mean, magkaiba yung moral principle na meron ka or meron doon sa kultura na kinalakihan mo kaysa doon sa ibang kultura na pupuntahan mo. At nag-a-apply lang yon into certain group of individuals. Okay? So, meaning to say, iba-iba tayo ng kultura, iba-iba din yung moral principle natin. So, on that part, so let us discuss the Asian moral understanding. So, sabi ko nga sa inyo, meron tayong iba't ibang way on how we understand culture so as we understand the moral principles. And sabi ko nga kanina, or nabanggit ko kanina na ang isang moral principle, it sometimes can only be applied to a certain group or certain culture. So for this part, let us talk about what Asian moral understanding is. First, we're going to talk about ano nga ba in general yung meron sa kultura or meron sa ethics ng isang Western countries. So in a Western setting, Western ethics, it focuses on finding the truth. Ano nga ba yung katotohanan? That is the focus of Western ethics. So as the Asian ethics, the focus is the protocol and showing respect. Okay, as you can see, in general, in so many Asian countries, diba? We honor our family. We always honor our family. And in some culture of Asians, ayan, is meron tayong tinatawag na filial piety. Ayan, filial piety. Yung filial piety na yon, ito yung utos sa atin kung saan yung mga magulang natin, meron silang responsibilidad na palakihin tayo at the same time, supportahan tayo throughout our life until such time na dumating na kailangan o na kaya na natin yung mga sarili natin. So, as tayo naman, bilang mga anak, is we have to give back to them by obeying their orders or obeying kung ano man yung kanilang opinions na sa tingin natin is makakabuti sa atin. So that is Asian ethics. We have to show respects to other people. So let us compare these two ethics. So yan, we have here Western ethics, ng focus niya, as I have mentioned earlier, finding the truth. Okay? Seeking the truth. Malalaman niyo yan in some discussions later on. So, siguro hindi naman dito sa lesson na to, but on our other lessons. And we have here, for Eastern ethics, we have the protocol and respect. So, next one, we have the basis. So, Western ethics based on the rational thoughts, meaning to say, they see first kung ano ba yung valid dun sa mga reasons na yun, and they rationalize. Titingnan nila kung ano ba yung mas possible na pwedeng maging kasagutan dito. And Eastern ethics, ang basis niya is the religious teachings. Kung ano man yung turo ng mga religious beings or religious sectors that we have here, no? Yung mga turo nila, doon tayo nagbe-base ng ating principle sa buhay. So as ang emphasis for a Western ethics is logic and the cause of and effect. So what is the cause of a certain situation and what would be the effect of it in the society? And in Eastern ethics, it emphasizes the respect towards the family. So, yun nga po, nasabi ko na kanina. Roots in, kung saan man nanggaling, nung concept ng Western ethics, it came from the Athens, Rome, and Judeo-Christianity. Whereas the Eastern ethics, it came from the Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. Kung mapapansin nyo po, dito sa mga parte na to, Christianity, Athens, Rome, and Judeo. So, itong mga to ay nanggaling po sa Eastern or sa Western parts of the world. Whereas, ito, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism ay nanggaling po dito sa Asian or sa Eastern parts of the world. So, ang approach po for Western ethics is rational. Whereas Eastern ethics is holistic and cultural. So which means all of the basis of the moral understandings and moral standards is based on the way they approach it is culturally or what are the teachings or religious teachings that they have in that certain type of culture. So as being rational, that is the approach of a Western ethic. So, conflict and harmony. Ano ba yung mga nagiging parang pros and cons of this ethics? So, good must triumph over evil. So, kailangan na manalo ang kabutihan kaysa sa kasamaan. Yan yung konsepto ng Western ethics. So, as Eastern ethics, good and bad, light and dark, they all exist in the equilibrium. Which means, lahat ng bagay dito sa mundo ay magkakaugnay. Keso maganda man yan, or keso hindi. With that, let us end here our discussion. So let's continue the part 2 next week when we meet on our Google Meet. So for your activity, so I will be posting it next week na lang din po. Further assignment for today is kindly review this discussion through and through so as po mas maintindihan nyo yung ating lesson. Thank you for today everyone and God bless.